skill levels people will be as they watch this talk. So I'm going to go over just how you make a template, how you control the origin of the template, how you update the template. We'll start with that, and then we'll talk about some of the lovely things that templates can do for you. So let's just go get a plane. Now this is something that is just me. It has nothing to do with what you have to do, but I find the easiest way to control where the pivot point of my new object will be is to use a plane as a placement object. So you can see that I have made this bowl of questionable fruit. I'm going to drag a plane into the world. And the reason I use a plane is because it sits perfectly on the ground, right? That's what I want. I want the bottom center of my object to be on the ground. And then I just position that below whatever I'm making, so that it's where I want that to be. And you can see where this gizmo is with the three things. That's sort of the pivot or the origin. Sometimes it's called the center point of your object. So that's a really important position, because if you use script to spawn this thing into the world, or if you drag it out of core content, that is the bottom middle of it, right? That's gonna land it in the world. So that where that point is on your new template is very important. So I normally just make a new group below that thing and then just drag it out. If you don't change the dimensions of your plane, then your group will have, sorry, I always move these panels around like crazy. Your group by default will have no rotation or scale on it if you didn't do any to the plane. So then I can just delete the plane. I don't need it anymore. I just needed it to put that pivot into place. Then these are the objects that I made for it. So we're just gonna grab it inside there. Always name your things sensibly. Like if you're making crops for farming game, name them all like crop and then the name of the crop. Or if you're making cars, or like if you have anything where there's a lot of them in the future, you're going to forget those individual names. But if you have a group name for those things, your life will be much easier. I guess this is a fruit bowl, we'll say. Okay, so I have my objects. They're all inside of this thing. I just right click and I click new template from object. That'll pop up a window that'll let me rename it, but we already thought about the name ahead of time, so we don't need to do that. So we'll just hit new template. The object is now a template. That's it. It's going to be down in your hierarchy. Again, I recommend always organizing. I have a folder for my foods. The scene has a lot of food. So we have our thing. We've made it. Everything is happy and good. But why did we make it, right? There's a couple reasons. You might have made this so that you could Funklicious, the reason I don't do that is sorry, I got asked in chat why I do the plane thing. That's because if you are just a crazy kit basher like I am, and you just make tons and tons of art, you often don't sit at a place at the beginning where you could have a method, right? When I started kit bashing Coralcraft, for example, I had no idea what anything could look like. So I didn't know where those pivot points would need to be. Same way I'm kit bashing furniture. Some objects like this bowl, I actually didn't need to make the plane because I think the bowl might even just sit on the ground. So I could have used its pivot point to create the group. But I've just, all the templates I've made for Trick or Treat Town and stuff like that, I end up needing to do this a lot. So it was a tip more for artists who work like me, who might have insane pivots depending on what they've built and how much they've abused the system to build those objects. Anyway, so say we've made this thing because we want to spawn it through code, right? In that case, that's fine. You just made an object, you just want to spawn it through code. You don't really have to think about it that more. But as an artist, you might actually be spawning it so that you can access it and change it in different ways, right? Like you want to use these as decorative things in your scene. And it's useful to know that you can have copies of it out that have slightly different properties that won't change the original. So one of those fruit bowls I just duplicated, one I pulled out of my core content, right? It doesn't matter. I can pull out as many as I wanted now. And if I just, there's certain things that while this thing is still templated, I can change and they won't actually change the original template. So if I rename this template to Bob, it doesn't do anything. That's just a local change. You'll notice the one in core content still has the old name. These others still have the old name. It doesn't have any effect, right? Like that's just a local change on Bob. Likewise, if it was an object that had a custom property on it, as long as I didn't update the template from this, which I'll show you how to do, and I had a custom property just on Bob, that was like, you know, saying that it liked to spawn in something, you know, like say it's a custom property in the farming framework, for example. It would mean that I could have each of these out and each of them could have their own custom properties. There's other things you can do too without de-instancing the group. Like I could just lift this one apple and make it fall over on the table beside it. And again, it wouldn't have any effect on the other templates unless I right click and I hit update template from object. If I do that, then it will replicate out to the one that's in core content and the other one. So that's useful to know if you're doing this for using this for art reasons, right? That you can have a lot of the advantages of using a template and override only the changes that you need. Now, some properties, like some of the material properties and stuff like that, you have to de-instance your template to get at, right? Not every property is accessible while it's still visible. So let's just de-instance this. You do that the same way. Just de-instance template. And now let's just go put some materials on these. I just put some material cubes at the back of my scene so that I could copy and paste materials on here. And actually, there's a few other things I should call out. If you've already overridden the position on one thing, like if I had this banana over here, but then I changed that banana and another thing, that wouldn't change that position. Oh, some of these things are so hard to easily explain. But one of the other things that's true is if I change this template now, right, now that this one is de-instance, but I'm going to de-instance another one. Okay, so we have two de-instance. You can tell they're de-instance when they're green. And I'm going to just grab this material that I made and I'm going to stick it on the bananas. Okay. So if I hit update template from object, notice that the other de-instance one didn't change. I actually use this feature a lot as a tricky way to, like if I have a placement object out in one of my games that sometimes I want to be art and sometimes I want to be a dummy object, I'll often keep two templates like this that are each version and I'll keep them de-instanced until that's the version I want. And then I'll update the template from that. And that change will propagate to all my placement objects. So it's like just a tricky time saving thing that you can do. But if I took this Bob one now and I hit update template from object, I would lose that material on the bananas again, right? Because that's now the parent object. So just being aware of that. As soon as you hit that, you can override a lot of properties on it. So it's best to just experiment yourself and sort of see what you can do with this. So I'm just going to finish putting that material. We'll just take that and we'll put it on these ones. and we're going to update that template. So now we have our beautiful fruit bowls in all of the things. One of the other basic, we'll delete Bob. We don't really need Bob now. One of the other basic things that you do in templates that's important to know about is if I take this template here and I scale it, and then I hit update template from object, it did scale it. And if I look at that one, if like I pull a new one out, you'll notice that it has a scale of 1.866. So something important to know is that in most cases, when you pull a template out by code, if I had have told, say, the farming framework that I wanted to spawn this, it wouldn't have taken this scale. Even though I can put that on there, it wouldn't have gone with it when the thing was being pulled out by code. So if you are in, a framework or a lot of other coded things, and you're spawning, say, a weapon, and you try to scale the size of the weapon by scaling the outer container, but then when you actually hit play, your weapon's tiny again, this is why. Things are generally spawned out at a scale of 1 and a rotation of 0 into whatever container they're being spawned into. So your best practice is never to do this. You're best off to, if you want to change the size of your objects inside of the template, how I would normally actually set up if this was like my own thing, right? I'd actually probably have, actually have a client context folder, but we'll just do a group in this case. And the art would be inside of that thing. And I would call that like geo generally. And the names don't matter. It's just, I like to be consistent in my own work, so I know what I'm doing. And I would make the scale changes to that, right? Because now everything will still get those same updates. But if we click on the outside level of any of the templates, the scale is 1. And it'll just play nicer with code. So your best practice is your whole library of templates should have no scale or anything on them, right? They shouldn't come with any values here. That will make your stuff function better if you need to work with a coder, or if you've put out CC and a coder needs to work with your work. So I want to talk next a little bit about why this might be useful. There's several reasons this could be useful to you. One of the ones that I think is most important to an artist, even if you're not, doing spawning templates with code, is just making your own life easier. So say I have a whole world and I've used all my foods to decorate that world, right? I've put out pies and puddings and apple barrels and everything, and then I decide that it's now an alien world and all my apples need to be purple or whatever. It would be a pain to go and find them or figure out, if it was a custom material, maybe I could override that, but I have to do a lot of work, right? But if you've used nested templates, let me shut off my collision folder here. If I've used nested templates like I have here, like these apple pies are nested templates, and this is actually set up this way in the farming framework. I just ripped this right out of there. That means that I can decide that my place doesn't sell, apple pies anymore. They now sell grape pies very easily. That was a case where I have to de-instance it in order to get all the material properties. So it would let me drag a new material on, but I couldn't reset these values without de-instancing. That's kind of what I mean. You don't have access to all of the properties while something is still a template, only some of them. So then if I hit update template from object, now all of the pies that I had everywhere in my world will have changed, right? That's a really big time saver, especially because it lets you gray box your world with literal boxes, right? I could have had all these pies be cylinders and be like, that's going to be a pie later. And I just make a template out of that cylinder and then go replace them all with the art once I have them. It just makes your life much easier. It also lets you, if you're a scripter, control parts of your objects, like with nested templates. So for example, in Dragonport, a couch could be made of a frame and cushions and a seat thing, and we can access all of those and swap all of them out differently for either different meshes or different materials on them. So mastering sort of the system and exploring nested templates and how you can change things is just exceedingly helpful for all of those things. So since I've shown you this sort of quick example of how to make a template and de-instance a template, oh, you know what? I'm going to show you one more thing really quick. If you've pulled stuff in from core content and it came as a bunch of templates, but you don't actually want those templates anymore, like you're just going to break this stuff, but there's now like 1,000 templated pies or whatever in your scene, if you just hit delete on the thing in your core content and you hit save, the effect that will actually have is to de-instance them all. So that will trash the original template references. It'll get rid of them. You'll be able to just use them normally, and they're now just objects in the scene. So if there's a template I don't need anymore, but where I still want the art to stay in the scene, that's what I normally do. I just nuke the original thing.
That is brilliant. You've changed my life.
My whole thing is like trying to find ways to have stuff be less work. That's like my entire life. Okay, so let's go back. Sorry, I've got this on the other monitor. I've made a couple scenes here for you. I've made this one here, which we'll go into first. And I've made these beautiful corals. Okay, it's an army of them. And all of these are templates. And the little blue reef they're on is also a template. It's a lot. I'm using a little over 10,000 of the object count of these coral reefs. This shows you to be efficient with your modeling. If you try to make everything hyper detailed, you will run out of your budget of objects very quickly. Okay, so that is the first one. And in the second one, let's edit this one so I could show. I did the same thing, but I basically did what I just showed you. I nuked the template so that de-instanced every reef. Okay, so I still have the exact same project. It looks the same, it's set up the same, but all of the reefs and all of the little happy reef rocks inside of them are no longer templates. They're just objects in a scene. So now what we're going to do is hit Show Project in Explorer. And we're just going to go up a level and we're going to take a look at what happens there. So for the one where we have everything still templated, you will notice that it is 2.05 megabytes on the disk. And actually, a lot of that is the screenshot. Each of those have a screenshot with them. Now, the second one, if we go Properties, and we look at it, we'll see that it's 13.4 megabytes on disk. Like there is a savings, a real savings to using templates, especially if it's any object you're going to use a lot, like a tree or something like that, because then core only needs to remember a reference and a position to that original thing and maybe some override changes if you need them. It doesn't have to remember all the geometry and all the stuff that you're doing inside of it. So this is like pretty important. If it might not seem like a lot, and this is obviously a very exaggerated scenario, but if you're making a large game that's going to have a lot of updates over time, this could definitely add up in your folder, especially in cases where a lot of your game is spawned in, right? So a game where you're spawning in levels and stuff, if you spawn in a forest where each tree in the forest is one of 4 templates, or you spawn in a forest where each tree is just its own separate core object, one of those is going to be a lot bigger than the other in your save data. And probably even load time would be affected, although I haven't done enough tests to speak to that, but I would assume so. This is pretty normal stuff in game dev, right? That generally references to stuff are more efficient than not. So I wanted to give sort of a real game example of that. So just let me open up a couple pictures here. I should have opened these before I started, but I did not. Okay, I'll bring these over so you can see them. So this is just a screenshot of what Dragonport looks like in the editor. In the editor, even sitting there with, not hitting play, it still has 7,000 objects in the scene. Most of those are probably, a few of them are making up this geometry. A lot of them, like maybe even a few thousand, are actually the database because tables didn't exist when we made this. So that means that our data is stored as scripts in the hierarchy. But um, and then some of them are like placeholders where resources spawn and stuff. So even just sitting there, we're still sitting at 7,000 objects. But just to try to explain the cost savings to a game that using templates well can give you, I pulled out all of the maps on Dragonport. So I pulled out all the contents of town, all the player houses, all the player house interiors that spawn under the ocean. That's where we hide all of our, spawnable locations. I pulled out, the inside of the barracks and the inside of the tower and all of those things. And I just put them in a map. And you can take a look at my object count, right? Now it's up to 26,700. And that's not including resources. I haven't pulled any resources or shop items. That doesn't include any player decorations, right? Like if you had every possible object, so 16 players worth of houses full of stuff, and all the resources spawning out on the streets and everything that was up for sale in the shops, it would be sitting ridiculously far over 30,000, right? It's probably closer to 80 or 90,000 objects that we use in this game. But because we use client context very carefully, we like decorative objects, might have one or two things that are the colliders, and then all the rest of the art you would see would be put into a client context in its own template. And we only load, a player only has to load up their own client context stuff, right? And so we can have 16 players out in different areas, and our total object count will still be under 30,000. Generally, it's going to be maybe sitting around 20 or so in a normal session. So I just want people to understand that this limit of 30,000 objects is just a limit on how many can be in the scene at once. If you're loading and unloading levels, then you can have way more than that in your actual project. And there's definitely lots of room for it in your total, folder size where you can't go over 500 or whatever it is to upload your project. There's lots of room for many more than 30,000 objects as long as you're being efficient and modeling carefully. So I'm going to go back to sorry, alarm, I forgot to shut off. So we'll go back into this project again. And I will put Discord back so I can see questions again. What have I done? 750 megabytes Funklicious, 100 megabytes per scene. Yeah. I've never anywhere near hit that. If we look at the Dragonport folder and we don't look at what GitHub's taking up, because it's mostly GitHub taking up the space, I think it's only like 64 or something sitting in there. So it's really, if you're being careful with your art, it's actually, you can make pretty big games without going over things. But the templating is really important, right? Because otherwise you're capped out at 30,000 objects, and that's, not going to describe that much. Like if your house interiors are not visible when you are at the outside of your house, you should not be loading them up until you're in that space. And Commander Fu said 500 megabytes total. But anyway, I haven't need anywhere near 500 megabytes, right? Like, just not even close. And I do a lot of kitbash for my stuff, so you should be pretty good to go once you understand this system. So what else did I? Let me just check my notes. What else did I want to go over here?
Do you want to show some things with nested templates? Okay, yeah, if you've got stuff, go ahead.
Well, I have a checklist here and I've covered a lot of it, but there was this one thing. One of the other reasons to make templates, even if you don't want the stuff templated in your scene, is art backups. So say I have a town, right? And I've put out all the Christmas decorations or Halloween. Here, actually, let's go. We're going to go into Trick or Treat Town. Sorry, I'm showing my own projects, but that's what I have access to, and I can't really use my work account because I would show too many secrets. So, but there's nothing secret about my account. So we're just gonna take a look here. So in Trick or Treat Town, I had a Christmas event, right? And this is that Christmas event. But when I took Christmas down, I just made it a template, right? And I put it out in the scene because I was sort of working on stuff. But because it's a template with the same origin as town, when Christmas comes back to Trick or Treat Town again, I can just dump it back in town, right? Like, this is another one aimed squarely at artists, but it's putting it as a template and then, having a folder of all your event decor is just very handy, right? It's just a really nice, clean way of using them. And it also means you can work on the event in another scene, right? Without messing with your coder's GitHub if you're sharing a project and stuff. So I recommend doing things like this, like backing up things that you need or older versions of your art. You can't do it infinitely because you'll bloat your project size. But if it's stuff like this that you're going to reuse, or if you need to like A/B test two different objects, templates are another really good thing to use.
You could also do this to literally have this only active during the event and then go automatically.
If you're a scripter type and you put hooks into this, this is an excellent thing to just do automatically. I have asked my scripter to do that. He has not yet.
We have a simple example on Docs if you go into the events reference, so you could just copy that code and do it with your template.
It has to play with our event.
Yeah.
We have an event loading thing in our game, so I have to play with that. But I'm not allowed to mess with the code. I would break things for Brad. So I'm gonna go into where's the best. I'll open Coralcraft actually to show this. I'm gonna show a thing that is very helpful for nested templates. I have too many projects, but those aren't all my fault. My son plays on my account too. So if I go into here, what I was experimenting with last time I was playing in this was making buffs. And to know if my buff is affecting and hitting an object, I needed a visual change in my objects, right? I'm not a scripter. I can't make it write something. I need to visually know that my buff was hitting it. But it would be really annoying to go and add and tweak something in each individual state of art, right? So the coral grows, it grows up through these sizes. So what I wanted was this buff detector. So this piece in the middle will bleach if it's getting a bleaching one, and these little lights, they're black if it's not hitting a buff, and they'll be colored when a buff is hitting. And what I've done is I've literally, let's de-instance the main one so you can see what's what. I have the main template here, which is the wild tree coral, right? And inside it has, this is just the art for my actual thing. But then I've added this extra piece into here, just called buff detector. And that thing has a bunch of scripts in it, and it has these in it. And this thing reacts to buffs. But because I can use nested templates now, I can just literally put the same buff detector in every single state, and it'll let me work on it without having to mess with any of them. And say that I am done for now testing. Say that my portal is working, but I think I'm going to need to test it again later. If I just de-instance this, actually I'll de-instance the one that's out in the scene. just so you can see. I know it's a little bit, if you're not used to templates, seeing the nested stuff can be a little bit confusing. So if I just de-instance this and I pull these scripts back out, right? And I just put them in some backup location, and then I hit update template from object, that'll make those buff detectors all essentially gone, right? The scripts aren't there. They're just an empty group and everything. But then if I decide later that I had made a mistake and I need those testers all back, I can just put all that stuff back inside again, right? That's why nested templates are so powerful, because they let you access your own things in ways that can just make your life as a developer much, much easier. So I can show another sort of example of that. Then I've put them all back, and it's brilliant and excellent. So I'm just going to go into one. I'll go back to Dragonport, I guess, to show this other one. So many projects. Okay. So one of the challenges in Dragonport that we encountered early on is, at first we actually had the placeholders of our resources be the actual kitbash resources. But as the map got bigger, like once we even got to 3 areas, it was so many objects, right? Because you see all those boxes, right? Those are all resources. And so having the geo for this, it would destroy it when the game started, but literally the time it took to destroy all those placement, like the geo that was just holding the spot for my thing, was too expensive. It was like a noticeable lag at the start of the game. So what we ended up doing, once nested templates came in, I made this change, is I made each of these things and I called it a placement object. And then oops, would help if I could spell. We want ready client. So I just do that. And now all my trees are out, right? And likewise, I would normally turn off the dummy object if I was doing that. Oops. I did the wrong thing. Where's visibility? So that way, that's how I put all my art back every time I need to, like, if I have to change the terrain or whatever, right? So nested templates, like even used in just small ways like this, are just insanely helpful to like save you time going in and out of things. That's why if you haven't played with them yet to do your level design, I really, really recommend exploring that kind of feature, right? That it can let you essentially touch every node without having to, because I could have just made these not templates and dragged that tree into each one of them, but that would be terrible, basically. So yeah, this kind of use, I think, is some of the funnest ways. So I haven't covered like every possible thing, but that's like most of what I really wanted to cover. Is there like any questions or anything that people want to ask?
Well, one of the things that I actually don't see that much, except for since working in the farming framework, is those dummy objects. Do you want to just like talk about what that is for anybody watching the video who hasn't used them before?
Yeah, the farming framework was an interesting challenge because although I'm used to working in games where everything is controlled through some kind of data structure and then pivot points in the world where stuff spawn, because I've always made a lot of creative games with Boo Radley. We tend to make games where players control their visual worlds in some ways, and so you need systems like that, right? That's inherent. But that's not really true on core. People don't tend to make a lot of these games where everything is spawned. So I knew that when I made this game, like honestly, none of this needs to be visible. I could have just made this a base plate, right? And the rest of this game, this framework, just doesn't need to be here. There's no, I mean, there'd be empty groups holding all the positions, but that is not very friendly to work with. Nobody would be able to figure out what was going on. So what we ended up doing is relying heavily on the dummy objects. The dummy objects in core are things that do not spawn in your game. Like you won't see them after you hit play. They're literally for making things easier during editing mode, to show you where something is going to spawn or be placed. They're sort of a tricky little things too. Let me pull one out. Like when I first used them, I don't even know if I saw the advanced checkbox on them. So if you just pull a dummy object out, it'll be aligned like that on the ground, and it'll be a sphere. But you can, or a capsule. So you can change to box, sphere, or capsule are your choices. I normally use boxes because I find them a bit easier to see. The spheres, I find a little harder to judge, like, you know, how far into the floor it is or something. So I normally use the boxes. And you can position them this way with this set of like offset tools. And in a lot of my own projects, I actually do that because I like that they're consistently in that placement. But I think that that's maybe sort of confusing for people that aren't used to working with numbers and sliders. So if you just shut off this absolute scale thing, then you can use a dummy object or the manipulator to change the size and stuff and the position of the dummy object without having to use these slider things. So then you could just ignore them and just do this. And it's like very helpful to do that. Earlier when I mentioned that you could change a custom property without changing the template, we're leaning on that super heavily in the farming framework. So say I was just adding a new area to the farming framework. We're just going to pretend. I won't really build one, but sorry, I'm actually setting up here to teach someone how to make breedable animals using the farming framework. So I've got all this stuff out. Mm. Just get this out of my way so it doesn't confuse me. Okay. So if we just make a new area, we'll go get a plane. We'll make it much bigger. Not that much bigger, perhaps. Okay, so say that's our new area, and we'll just call it a house. Okay, so that's our house. I'll move this up by 1 so it stops blinking. Oops, stops blinking at you and probably killing your eyes. There we go. I'm so used to watching that Z fighting. Everything I do has that when I'm setting stuff up. So if I go into project content and I'll go into my templates and I go into functional and I'll click on area, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of templates that can just be used to build an area. And this is just working this way in our framework. It doesn't have to work this way in every framework. I'm not trying to show that, but I am trying to show that you can have a template that has like functionality on it. Oops, not that one. I want the object loader, right? So this is an object loader. All it does is load up a template. That's what it does. And you can put it in one of these custom properties. So a person can pull out like 10 of them, right? And have different custom properties on each of them. Just don't update all the other templates from that one, you know? Fine. Just only touch the custom properties. So this system works really well where you have all these base things that a player doesn't actually need to de-instance or open. They just work like a brick, like a Lego brick, right? It just has a function and you just pull it out and just change only the custom properties on it. It's one of the most helpful ways to use templates, like from a functional perspective. These are great. I actually really like the area system that Boo Radley made here, and then I can just pull this stuff out and change the properties on it. There's also that's the same way that the reactive scripts in this system work, which I forget the names of every time. So this won't work right now because you have to pull it into an object that's hooked up in the database and stuff for it to work, but they're working the same kind of way, right? The same way how you would put properties on that. Like everybody does that all over the place, but you can just do that on templates too that come with other functionality. So that's dummy objects. That's sort of using custom properties on templates to control things. I don't know. Is there anything else, Saz, that you want me to mention while I'm here? I apparently lost that.
I'm thinking. I was more thinking of like, once upon a time the client and static geometry as separate templates was just like bread and butter, something you had to do all the time.
I didn't know if you wanted me to start talking about context. This framework is interesting because we were working on it well before the new nested template and sort of nested context stuff was put in. So that means you can see in our design the legacy of how it had to be done. So if I go into like an object loader on here, for example, I have 4 potential lots, right? You can put a template, you can make a static template, and then you make a client template, and then you can make a server template. And I have actually never even used a local one. The local stuff is still so new. Boo Radley threw support in for the local assets so that people could use them, but most of the framework doesn't make use of them because they just weren't there when we were designing it. So originally, if you wanted to make a crop, you need the visual part, right? Let's just go get the crop. You need that, and you don't really actually want the I want producer. Okay, so let's just go look at the bee house. So this is the old model for the bee house, which actually probably shouldn't even still be in here. But you can see that it's like I was spawning all of this stuff into the client context, right? And then oh, that's why, because I picked the producer base. Okay. Let's go with the ready static. So this is what spawns on top of it. And normally you wouldn't want all that visual stuff to be in a static template if it worked how it was before. Because I don't know if people know, but like the artists, I'm sure all the programmers know this. But when stuff is in the static, that means it has collision and the server can see it. So it means that even if you're, wanting only one player to be able to see it, because it's just a visual decoration, for example. If you put it in static context, that means it's actually wasting everybody's object count, even if you're trying to show it only to that one player, and that's not great. But so to solve this problem before, you would have had to make 2. You would have had to make a version with the visuals, right? And a version with the collision. So you'd make 2 templates. You'd make a static context template and a client context template, and you'd spawn them both in the same spot. So in this case, like in this made-up example I'm kind of doing, because this setup is a little bit more confusing because I'm actually, I don't want to explain the producer system right now. So in this case, our static is actually, let's go get it. If we'll just look in collision view. So that's our static model, right? It's just 2 objects. right? And then the client to client models I'm spawning are this one here and this one here. Now this one is set to spawn directly into client, so I'm using the old system, right? But this one is set to spawn into static because we needed it to be that way for the producer. It's how things needed to be set up. So this is a bad example. Let me find a better one. Oh, I'll go show you a watermelon. That's a much better one. I can't spell watermelon.
I think 1L.
Yeah. You would not believe how many misspellings there are and were and will be in the farming framework. I'm sorry to everyone. I should never write data for anything.
This is game dev. No points for spelling, except in words.
Okay, here's a much better example because it doesn't make use of producers and producer bases and everything else. So this would have previously had to be two models, right? You would have needed one for the pretty little leafy things because you don't want to waste having objects like that in your regular context. And then it would have needed the other model because you want to step on the watermelon, right? So it would have needed to be two things. But now with the contexts we can have now, we can actually just make a client context folder and put it inside a static context item. So what you see in the farming framework is like a hybrid of that. And I was actually discussing this with a creator I was trying to help last night, trying to explain why this is so important. If you have, say, a bunch of animated geometry where you're moving, so you have like a statue, a living statue. It's not a monster, but it's a thing that, you know, like a giant clock or something like that, right? Where it's like its arm is moving every day, right? It's some kind of like ambient environmental thing. If that is all in the static folder, which is what a lot of artists are doing by default, that whole thing, it's like the system needs to calculate the collision cost for that moving object. That is awful performance-wise, really bad. And with a mixture of nested templates and nested contexts, you can just completely get away from that stuff really easily. So you can make your statue, spawn your statue out with like a big box collider around it as a template spawned in the static context. But inside of it, you can have a client context folder. Like you can spawn in a client context folder, or you can have a client context folder. And so there was rules around that stuff before that just don't work that way now. And it's a big advantage that we can make stuff a lot more efficient, a lot more easily with the context stuff. And it makes a huge difference, especially if you're like one of those kit bashers who like puts tons of detail on everything. That detail is really, really expensive if it has to render for everybody, even if they're not even in the area or zone where that object is, right? So that's sort of why you should use the client context folder. It's mostly for performance reasons. So I don't know, is that kind of cover it, Slinkus? Like I didn't.
That is exactly what I was hoping. It is sort of weird we have all of this legacy stuff that does it this different way, and now it's just make a static context for almost everything you're going to spawn.
Yeah, and then just put the decorations in client. That's going to be generally your best practice. Because of the legacy stuff in the farming framework, if you want a reactive component, so say you want a fire to start in your furnace when you add metal to it, you actually have to use a client context template in the client context slot in the farming framework because it's a legacy thing, and we designed it that way because it wasn't even possible to do the other thing when we started the framework. So unfortunately there is some legacy stuff even in this brand new framework that just came out, because the truth of it is we've been working on it for a very long time. But
and Core is just always giving us new amazing quality of life features that we need to reorganize around.
Yeah. But this one, oh my goodness, as soon as I had the nested templates and the nested context, I went through this framework and like changed almost every asset. It was much worse before. Like before, you needed 2 templates for each crop. You needed one for the clickable area that was a static, right? And then all the art had to be in a client template of its own. So there was 2 templates for every crop, like that, literally double the templates, right? And I don't think any of us wants that. It's gross.
It's really nice to not have to do that anymore and to be able to have them all in one piece.
Yeah, it's ridiculously helpful. Um, and it just makes like when you're updating the art, right? Here, I can show you a good example of that actually. Maybe house front yard. So when I was working on these houses, right? If I pulled one out to work on, clearly a house, a very flat house. This was on purpose. I was trying to make you all use the nice tiles and core and build proper houses and replace. You're not supposed to leave this thing in your game, just so you know. So before I used to have to actually bring out, this thing was a second template, and I'd have to bring them out and put them in the same spot. You know, if I wanted to adjust the curtains on the house, it was a pain. It was a bad time. I didn't like it, and I'm very glad that I got to fix that for almost everything. There's a few things that still have um, 2 templates, again, because of our scripts. I think producer bases are one of them. Like if the producer base had to have a reactive script inside of it, then I had to leave it as 2 pieces. So that's why you'll see still, this is sort of what everything used to be like before. So I don't know if I can find fertilizer bear client static. So you'd have to pull them out together, right? And then this is another kind of for work thing, but I had to have all the art for this one in the client context, and then I had to have invisible collision on it. Like if you change it to player collision, that's the collider for it, which is just another invisible barrel, because otherwise you only outline half of it. You know,
Because the outlines are only client.
yeah, and it's, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So or we had to set it to point to one thing, right? So yeah, made me sad. I hate that I have 2 barrels in that one object. It drives me crazy, but such is life.
Such is life. So one of the things, because we don't have any more questions, but I would love to see you make these really cool workspaces where you're using to build your templates, and that would be a nice visual to finish off the templating process.
Okay, so scenes, not save whatever the heck I've been doing in there. Uh, Scenes have like changed my life in amazing good ways, right? Used to need a duplicate of the project all the time, and I was like working collaboratively as the artist without mucking up the main scene for your programmer was a nightmare. So this is Coralcraft. This is my own game. The main scene is Coral Town. So if we go over there, one of those cases, is it loading? Did I click? This is what it looks like. Notice it's all a bunch of dummy objects and stuff. I can hit play. Oh, I should have shot multiplayer preview. Too slow.
Yeah, shift equals will always be local preview. So sometimes I've just gotten into that habit so that I can't do this to myself.
So you can see that I actually play, if I'm just developing, I always use multiplayer preview because too many bugs slip by me when I'm being lazy. So even when I'm just in the art scene, I normally leave it to that so that I am being a good little developer and finding my problems early. So this is what the game actually looks like, right? It's much like it is the farming framework, really. It's just a reskin, where we've just got a bunch of dummy objects and stuff that doesn't show up. That error is a known bug in the farming framework. We'll fix it. So we'll go over here back to the art scene. And all of these, every single one is a template. I lay them out like this so that I can work on them as sets, right? Like I know then that chopping this rock results in this rock, results in this rock, right? This way I can see at a glance what these are placement objects, like what I showed you in Dragonport, same kind of deal. This way I can see sort of at a glance everything that I've added to my game. I can keep stuff a consistent size. These are the chairs you can grow with different kinds of coral. And if I want to make a change to them, because they're templates, I just change them right here and hit update. Like if I needed to, change the color of every red sponge in the game, I can just click on it and make that change, and it'll be consistent, like slightly changing all the shades of orange and whatever. So I always have an art scene like this. And first it would have a mock-up of the art, then I would template all the art, and then as I keep adding new art, it will be all in this scene. Unless I, started having performance problems or something. If it got too big, then I would start clearing some of it out or make a second art scene. But we're a long way from that. I'm only using like 3,500 objects, so we're good. But yeah, I think having an art scene is like super, super helpful, and especially with templates and tables. Like if your game uses tables, it means you can set up the data for your art scene, for your game from the art scene as well, right? Like I don't need to go and change the hierarchy in the main scene to add any of these corals to the game. I just have to add them into the starting items and add them into the templates where they'll grow. And so somebody else could be working in the actual main scene of the game and I would have no effect on them, right? Like the mixture of templates and tables is super, super powerful for this kind of work. To keep you out of each other's hair, basically.
We've also seen the opposite, right? Which is every time we wanted to look at a template, we first got into project content, searched the name again, dragged it out. Oh no, that wasn't the right one. Drag out another one. And when you have it all staged like this, you can also just make this process a lot more efficient.
I do both, right? Like I thoroughly organize my project content into folders. Like I name all my materials, not necessarily while I'm kit bashing, but if I've just kit bashed for an hour, the final thing that I've done, just like in Minecraft, if I was playing for an hour, the final thing I do was put all my stuff in chests. The final thing I do after an hour of kit bashing is name materials, delete ones I didn't use, make any templates I need to, put those into folders. Then I save and close the project, right? That way you're not working in a mess. It's bad to work in a mess, and it's hard, especially in a game like this that could have hundreds and hundreds of objects, right? Yeah, share love. The further into your game dev career you get, and the more you learn to do things cleanly, the more you will realize that you used to do things in a bad way. Like even how I name things has changed a lot. When I'm naming things for me now, it's always in sort of a hard to read way, but it's a easy to find and search way, right? So it's like it should be coral tree orange, not orange tree coral. Right? Like because that way the same thing, the same way they're laid out beautifully in my scene, that way they'll be laid out beautifully in my project content as well. Like when I open a folder, they'll all be together in the way that I want them to be together, right? So anyone gets nicer, cleaner workflows over time, I think. But yeah, in core, if you are an artist who has not been taking enough advantage of templates, please learn the template system and get good at it. It will make you make your beautiful things faster, which means I will get to play your beautiful games faster. And I like this plan a lot. I need more games, lots of games with building and all kinds of spawned environments. Like if you're making a freaking obby, you should be spawning in levels. Your performance will be better, right? This is a really achievable thing. We'll maybe do another talk just on how you could use the area system and spawning templates through it just for optimizing any game that's not like farming framework game. Because yeah, that's to take real advantage of templates, you need a system, some code that will spawn them in for you.